Child support. Love it? Hate it? Either way, you're affected by it. You may be paying or not paying. You may be collecting or not collecting. At the very least, your tax dollars are going to support kids that aren't even yours. You are now tuned in to Deadbeats and Goldiggers, a show that talks about solutions for your child support problems and the broken child support system.
That ain't right!
Good afternoon. Welcome to Deadbeats and Goldiggers. I'm Simone Spence, and as you know, this is the Take No Prisoners, Sweep Nothing Under the Rug, Call It Like We See It show, where you can tune in to listen, and you can learn all you need to know to collect what's due to your children and figure out how to make the child support system work for you. And likewise, if you are a paying parent and you feel like you're being duped, this show can help you figure out how to turn that around. Now, on today's show, I have a couple of candidates for Domestic Sections 1 and 2 here in New Orleans, and that's otherwise known as family court for you guys who need to make those connections. So the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of people don't understand exactly what domestic court means, and they might think it's juvenile court, or they have just absolutely no idea what it means when you say domestic court. So I'm letting you know that on the ballot is going to say Domestic Sections 1 and 2, and you're going to have to make your choice, but I want you to know in the back of your mind that what they're saying basically is that this is the court that you are voting for right now for families, okay? Anything that has to do with family issues, so anything that has to do with things such as child support, child custody, visitation, community property, domestic abuse, those are the types of cases and matters that are heard in family court. So remember, Domestic Sections 1 and 2, otherwise known as family court, not juvenile court, okay? I want to take a second and let you know why this election is going to be so important for you folks, okay? So for my listeners, these are the reasons why I wanted to have these candidates on today. You are about to vote for judges who are going to be hearing your cases when you go for child support, when you go for contempt matters, when you go to get your orders established, when you go for enforcement matters. These are the judges who are going to be hearing these cases. And it's very important that they know what's important to you, and it's very important that you know what positions they hold and how they are possibly going to be making decisions on your behalf. So this is a show that you really need to listen to very carefully. Now, today's show is going to be a panel. We're going to be asking each candidate the same question and allowing them each the opportunity to answer that very same question. I invited all of the candidates for Domestic Part 1 and 2 today. I told them the listenership that this particular show has and the importance that this listenership holds. There are 5 candidates for Domestic Sections 1 and 2. And I want to talk about that because I don't want you getting confused, or what does this mean, Domestic Section 1 and 2? Okay, we're not going to be walking into the voting booths without a knowledge of what we're voting for and who our candidates are. Now, I think it's appropriate and necessary for people to know where you stand, or for that matter, where you sit. Janet Ahern, her rep got back to me and eventually said that she would not be able to make the show as well, even though she had indicated at some point that she would. Monique Bariel never even responded. All I'm saying is that there are 2 candidates whose names I want for you to remember. One of those candidates is sitting to my left, and her name is Patrice Harrison. And the other candidate, Michelle Scott-Bennett, is sitting to my right. And why? Though I think you should remember the names of these 2 candidates, Woody Allen has this quote that I really love, and he says, "Showing up is 80% of life. Sometimes it's easier to hide home in bed, and I've done both." All I'm saying is that this is a very important show, and we have some people listening who need to hear the voices of the people who have something to say to them. Okay, Michelle Scott-Bennett, number 67 on the ballot. Patrice Harrison, number 64 on the ballot. And again, to my left we have Patrice Harrison, and to my right we have Michelle Scott-Bennett, and I'd like to do some introductions.
Thank you, Simone. I appreciate you inviting me on the show as well. My name is Michelle Scott-Bennett, and I'm a candidate for Civil District Court Domestic Section 2. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am what's called a military brat. My mother was full-time Army, so for the first 13 years of my life, we traveled around. I went and attended DeRitter High School, so I have been in Louisiana for the last 30 years. So although I was not born and raised here, I have been here long enough to claim it and call it home. I attended LSU for undergrad and Loyola for law school, and when I graduated, I started my own practice, and I have practiced for the last 17 years in the area of family law. I also was privileged enough to sit as the domestic commissioner for 9 months, so I have judicial experience as well. And I've been married for the last 20 years to my wonderful husband, and we have 2 teenage children. And so that is what I bring to this position, and I just feel like the people who are coming into the family court, they need someone who is well-rounded, who will understand the issues, the relationship issues, the child issues that come before the court. So not only do I have the professional experience, but also the judicial experience and the practical experience of being a wife and a mother, and just understanding the day-to-day struggles of a parent.
Tell me about the moment when you decided to run for domestic judge. Michelle?
Okay, that's an interesting question, Simone, because back in 2004, when I was appointed as the ad hoc commissioner, about 2 weeks before I got the call for that, my husband and I had a conversation about me possibly being a judge, and at that point in time, I do not think that I was ready, and I guess the good Lord said, sure you are, and so I received the call to be appointed as the ad hoc domestic commissioner and did that for 9 months. When I decided to run for this position in 2012, when the legislation appointed designated family law judges, and the reason that I did is because I feel like God is just leading me in this direction, and also I have practiced for the last 17 years and seen the problems that people go through in family court, complained about those problems, and I just feel like I should be part of that solution.
And Michelle, I mean, you were the ad hoc commissioner for 9 months.
Correct.
You could have continued to be a benefit to the community as the commissioner. Why judge?
Well, unfortunately, as the ad hoc commissioner, I was appointed, and at the time, the commissioner who was sitting was ill. When he died, they decided to hire someone else, and so I was not able to maintain that particular position. I did go back to my regular family law practice for the last 10 years after I sat as the domestic commissioner, but I feel like it was my place and my time to run for judge. Being a designated family law judge is one of the things that I have always desired to do, and because I've always practiced in family law, I know that I have not only the proven experience, but also the disposition to do this job.
Michelle, what do you think about child support?
Well, the child support system is not perfect. I will agree 100% that you have complaints on both sides. Again, the women oftentimes feel that they are not receiving enough child support to raise a child, and the men oftentimes feel that they are paying too much child support to raise a child. At the end of the day, it's unfortunate that we have to have a system to make people meet their responsibilities, but it is what we have. And what I say to people is that basically, if the system is broke, then definitely you need to vote and you need to address your legislation regarding that system. Often we want to complain about how things work, but when it's time to vote and it's time to make those changes, nobody gets involved. So the people that are receiving child support, paying child support, complaining about child support, please look at the legislation. Get out there and get involved when they're making these rules, because as a judge, all we can do is enforce the rules.
Them. Exactly. You have the power. Make sure you push the button for folks who are going to be supporting your needs. The phone lines are blowing up. We're going to take some callers.
I was like wanting to know how does she feel about that situation when the mother is the one that's been taking care of this child all these years, and then the father wants to come about when child support makes them pay child support for the child.
Okay, yeah, you know what? That's a really good question, Brittany, because I do hear that very often, where moms will complain that the dad is out of their life. They don't see from him. They don't hear from him. I mean, he's completely ghost. and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, maybe child support catches up with him, maybe she catches up with him because she's a pro se litigant and she read my book, and she figured out, she figured the system out, but then all of a sudden, he's calling, and she's like, well, why are you calling now? Maybe my husband, my new husband, is taking care of the child, and he's daddy. Or, why are you here now after 12 years when we haven't seen you since the baby was 3 months old? So she asked the question of you, Michelle. I'd like to give you a moment to answer it, and then to Therese, I'd like to give you a moment to answer that as well.
Okay. How you doing, Miss Brittany? This is Michelle Scott-Bennett. I do remember your case, and in this particular case, of course, it was about custody that I was retained for. And I know that just in speaking with you that there were some issues regarding the child support. And oftentimes we see that conflict where one parent is saying, okay, he's only filing for custody because of a child support issue, and the other parent is saying, no, I really want to do something. I want to be in my child's life. And so as a practicing attorney, I really can't decide where, who is correct and who isn't. That's more of a case where you're taking the cases that are coming into you and the people that are hiring you. So I do remember speaking with you, and I do remember what your complaints were in regards to my client. I actually do remember who my client was. But, I mean, as far as the child support is concerned, we weren't addressing that at the time, just the custody issue. And in regards to the children, it's always a good idea. I do realize that, you felt like it was a little bit late for him to step up to the plate, but it's always a good idea when you have teenage children to at least try to include dad if at some point they want to be included. And so that was my goal in that particular case.
Michelle, there are many people who believe that aggressive measures of child support collection are unfair to the non-payers. What's your take on that?
Well, I believe that it is that you have to address it on a case-by-case basis. There are some people who need aggressive measures because they are not going to follow the court order. And that's unfortunate because when you don't follow the court order, it's the child that suffers. A lot of men feel like I'm giving money to mom, and what they need to remember is that the child has to eat every day. And so I am a person who believes that in some cases you do need aggressive measures. Now, as a judge, I believe that when you have a person who is trying to pay their child support, you should address that. But there are some people who just are going to ignore the order. They're not going to do what they say they're going to do. They're going to make mom or dad bring them back to court consistently and spend a whole bunch of money to try to collect a very little bit of money. And in those cases, you do need some aggressive measures. If a person goes to jail, unfortunately, they usually lose their job. But sometimes that's what you need to wake them up. I don't advocate just throwing someone in jail initially as the first offense for not paying child support, but if you have a consistent offender who's always back in court, who's not doing what they're supposed to do, then sometimes those aggressive measures are necessary.
Can a judge be too aggressive?
Okay, the question was, can a judge be too aggressive? The answer is always yes, because you have various situations where the situation that you just gave, okay, he owes $120,000.
Yeah, I want to hear on that situation.
Okay, in those particular situations, a lot of times what the huge problem is that dad knows the situation that mom is in, and when dad is self-employed or working under the table and receiving cash, it is extremely hard to prove what he's making, because oftentimes he's not filing taxes as he should be filing taxes, or he's not filing taxes at all. And so what the litigants face is the idea that you're saying he makes $30,000, he makes $50,000, he makes $80,000, but there's no documentation to prove that. I believe that once we get a person into court, then yes, the judge can ask for certain documentation, especially for child support. There are certain things that they are supposed to provide anyway, which is including your last year's tax returns, your last 6 months of check stubs. So if you have someone who is self-employed or receiving money under the table, then what we need to do is find out where that money is coming from and how much is actually being received, because it's awfully hard to do an income assignment if he's self-employed or he's receiving cash. And that is where you run into your huge problems at, because even though the judge wants to slap the gavel and say, yes, you have to pay this, the collection process is going to be the problem.
Question on Facebook. I went to a child support hearing last week, and I have high arrears. At the end of my hearing, when I was asked if I'd like to say anything, I said that the courts have failed me and my child by not giving the father any consequences. The judge apologized that I felt that way, but said that the court has done all that was in their power. Their father has made one payment in a year and works under the table. Says this writer. So what power does the court have? Michelle?
One of the things that I would suggest, and one of the things that I would do as a judge, is when you have parties that work for cash, is to bring them back into court. Obviously, you cannot do an income assignment if they're receiving cash. But what the judge can do is set a status date, a 30-day date. Okay, you have to make this payment. And if you don't make this payment, then you need to be back into my courtroom on this date to explain why, and so that your consequences can be met. And basically, to get that person on a payment schedule, have them coming back into court every 30 to 45 days to see if they've made their monthly payments. Because if you cannot collect from them through the system and they're not paying it voluntarily, then we need to monitor that a bit for the person who's receiving the child support to see what's going on and to see why. And this does not cost them anything, because if I set a status date and while they're in court and serve them while they're in court, then they have to come back for that date.
Well, I'm wondering, and I also know at this point his income has increased since we had our divorce decree, so which is what the 17% for the child support was based on. Is there a way to go back and make changes to that without having to go to court? And what do you suggest I do about the extracurriculars?
But as soon as you said, is there a way to go back and change that? And all three of us started nodding our heads yes. And then you said, without going to court. And we all went, no.
All right, Miss Samantha, this is Michelle Scott-Bennett. And basically what you have to do is to file something in court to get an increase. Whenever you are receiving child support through the courts and it's not through the state, then any increase is going to be based upon you having to file something. If you're receiving support through the state, every 3 years they usually will do a review of his income to see if they can get some additional or if he's making additional income. But when you have a judgment that was issued under the divorce, then that obligation falls on you to file something to ask for an increase. If your child is in additional extracurricular activities or private school or any of those things where you feel like you need an increase, unfortunately that expense does fall on you to file something with the courts.
I seem to talk a lot of stuff about my wife's ex. I think that sometimes people feel that this kind of stuff shouldn't be publicized, that it should be hidden like an ostrich with its head in the sand. I disagree simply because if you hide the issue, how can it be resolved or fixed? People who think that the issue of deadbeat dads should be hidden are, in my opinion, misinformed, or they are the significant others of the said deadbeat. In my wife's case, deadbeat has a girlfriend who completely supports his decision to not work and fulfill the role of housewife. This would be completely acceptable if said deadbeat had no kids from a prior relationship. Why not? It's 2014. But not contributing to the support of his children? Not cool and unacceptable. My wife asked the judge to look into an account that she believes that the ex has with money in it, but was turned down by the judge. Why? If it's his money, he could use that to pay down his arrears. How do you guys look at issues like that when it comes to, cases, matters? I mean, how do you plan to look at that?
Well, the part of the benefit of my experience is that I have handled these hard cases as a judge. When I sat as the domestic commissioner, those were the types of things that we tried. And unfortunately, when the context of the question, it says she asked the judge to look into it. What most people don't understand is that as the judge, there are only things that we can do. We are limited. When you come into court, if you have documentation about this account, I can look at that documentation. What I cannot do as the judge is subpoena information for you or try to take the lead role in your case and say, okay, well, you need to get me this, 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 and this so that I can prove your case for you. I can only deal with the things that are presented to me as evidence. And a lot of times your litigants don't really understand that just because they're telling you he has this account does not give the judge the authority to, seize that account or make him pay out of that account without any type of proof. Bring the proof. If he has that account, you all have to subpoena those records. Show me the account. Then I can order that he has to pay out of that account.
All right, that's real hot, Michelle. That was real hot. And I'm going to tell everybody why that was real hot. That was real hot because You know, that's something that I actually write about a lot in my book, because if you don't understand how to navigate the system, and you don't understand what the system is expecting from you or needs from you for you to give to them so that they can help you, you're just like a dead fish out of water, because you're going to completely still go through those revolving doors, and then that's when you get frustrated with the system. You say the system's not working, but the thing about it is that no one has told you how to navigate it, and you don't know how, and why would you? And that's the reason why I wrote my books, because people need to understand what's within their control, what's not within their control, and whatever is within their control, how to make it work for them.
As a sitting judge, what would you do on the preventive side? Before that young man come in your court, get subpoenaed by the judge to go to jail and all this kind of stuff, what programs would you might be able to come up with to help them without being injured by the court system?
All right, Joe, this is Michelle Scott-Bennett, and basically, unfortunately, before you get into court, the judge can't do a whole bunch for you. You know, I believe that instead of just putting people in jail if they are not employed, maybe we should have some type of system to try to give them options for employment, but there's not a lot that we can do prior to you coming into court to try to assist you.
Thanks, Michelle. This is Simone Spence, Deadbeats and Goldiggers. Thank you for listening.
I'm mad. Get down with my girlfriend.